today we're talking about sight reading. We're going to go over a few things to make sure that we can sight read better and that we can make more efficient use of our time learning music. So the first thing for good sight reading is knowing our major scales. Just knowing all 12 of them so that we can use them as a tool to read better. When we do this, we're going to use our circle of fourths, okay? And we'll review that for a few minutes now. When we look at the circle, we see that the key of C is at the top in the 12 o'clock position. And C has no sharps or flats in it, and so that's our starting point. As we go clockwise, we add a flat each time. And adding a flat and subtracting a sharp count as the same thing, so eventually we'll be able to get all the way around. So by adding a flat each time, that means the F scale has one flat, the B flat scale has two flats, E flat has three flats, and we keep going until we hit G flat, which would be six flats. G flat and F sharp are the same note inharmonically. That means that even though they're spelled differently, G flat or F sharp, that they're actually the same pitch on the keyboard, the same note. So the G flat scale has six flats and the F sharp scale has six sharps. When you play it, it ends up being all the same pitches, just spelled differently inharmonically. As we keep going around the circle, we're going to subtract flats now. So when we got from F sharp to B, we go from six sharps to five sharps. Then E has four sharps, A has three, 2, 1, until we get back to 0 for the key of C. Now the circle gives us our information of how many flats or how many sharps, but we also need to know the order that flats and sharps go in the key signature. They will always be the same order. So as we see here, if there's one flat, it's B flat. If there's two flats, it's B flat and E flat. Three flats, B flat, E flat, A flat. You just keep adding on to it. It can't be in a different order. It never will be. Most musicians just look at how many flats and they already know which ones they are. If it says five flats, you know it's B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat. If it says two sharps, you know it's F sharp and C sharp without having to actually read each individual flat or sharp because you know how many there are. Okay, now that we all remember our scales, we can look at our keyboard and we can visualize where our scale is going to be. So if we're doing E flat, that means I know I'm going to hit these guys. I've made this picture before I start playing. Then when I actually play my scale, I didn't have to make any decisions about what note I was going to play because I already had that picture in my head. Okay? Once we know our scales so well that we can get that picture right away, we can use them to help us read. Because when we read, we're going to have three rules that we kind of live by. Rule number one is rhythm. You've got to count. You have to know what beat you're on. Okay, if you play a B flat on beat 2, but it was supposed to be on beat 3, it's wrong. It doesn't matter that you still hit a B flat. It's in the wrong place, so it's wrong. So if we're not counting, we're done for. Rule number 2 is key signature, which is what we just talked about. If you know the key signature, then more importantly, you know which notes not to hit, right? So if I'm in E flat, I know not to hit this guy. I'm not going to hit that, or these, or this E natural. I know it's not going to be there, so it's going to save me a lot of trouble in the long run. Okay? And then rule number 3 is direction. Are you going up or are you going down? Up being to your right when you're standing behind the keyboard, and down being to your left when you're standing behind the keyboard. Okay? So if I know that I'm on, say, a G, I'm on this note right here, and I know I'm going up, and I know I'm staying in the key signature, I know where I'm headed right away. And I don't actually have to know the next note's in A flat, I just know that I'm still in the key that I was, E flat, and that it's next. Okay? So let's take a look at an example. When we look at this, we can see that it goes up and then down, and we're starting on a C. So we're going to go up, and then follow it back down the same amount. So during that, I don't need to think any note names or whatever. I'm in the key of C. I just went up and down. They were all quarter notes. So what I can do now is I could start in a different key. I could do that in the key of F and start on an F, and it would go like this. I'm not thinking about what notes I'm supposed to hit. I'm not like, oh, here comes a B flat. What I did is I made my picture for the F scale, and then I just went up and down in the F scale. And that's all I bothered with. I didn't think about F, G, A, B flat. That didn't bother me. I just went here, up, and back down. And that's what we want to think when we read. So instead of thinking half steps and whole steps while we're playing, while we're reading, we're just going to call them all steps. Okay? Because we know that the next note is going to be the proper half step or whole step because we're paying attention and staying in our scale. So as long as we're staying in our scale, we know everything's going to work out and it's going to be fine. Now that we have our stepwise motion down, what we can start talking about now is skips. So a skip is when you literally skip over one note in the scale. So if I'm in C and I do a skip, I'm going to skip over that note. And so instead of going C, D, E, I go C to E, whatever. This is also called a third, okay? Because we count 1, 2, 3, a third, okay? These are a third apart. We call that an interval. Now, when we do 2 skips in a row, that becomes an arpeggio. Now, we know that an arpeggio is like the first, third, and fifth note of the scale. So C major arpeggio is this. But we also know that a lot of other arpeggios exist in the scale. So I could keep going up in these skips, starting on a different note each time. And they all work out, and they all are arpeggios. And when we're reading, it can be helpful to know what they're called, but you don't actually have to. As long as you start on the correct note and skip in the key, you're fine. If I'm in a different key, let's say D flat, right? If I'm in a different key, it still works out. There's still just skips in there. I had to think maybe a little differently because after I made my picture, the skips moved around the keyboard a little bit more, but I'm still skipping one note in the scale each time. Okay, so as long as I'm keeping track of that, I know exactly where I am and I can use that information to play what I need to. So between skips and steps, that's actually a huge amount of what you're going to play. Okay, but we've got one more thing to talk about that's going to be really helpful, and that is sequences. Sequences are when we take a group of notes and we move the whole group up or down. Okay? So, an example of a very simple sequence would be this. So what happened is I played a 4-note group, and then I went one note higher and played the 4-note group again, and one note higher and played the 4-note group again. So if we check out the first note of each group, I just went up the scale. And then I filled in each measure with the scale in between. So I don't have to think about there being a big jump or skips or anything like that in this. I just keep track of the first note and move everything together. You will see sequences in your music all the time. They're all over the place. And a lot of times the big jumps we see can usually be explained by some other kind of pattern. So to practice sequences, we're going to learn an exercise called Modal workout. Okay? I'll play it for you and then I will explain how it works. I'm going to do it in the key of F just because it kind of fits better, this being a vibraphone. So here we go. That right there is basically the most important exercise we can do. It covers your whole key signature starting on any note. So wherever you're starting in your music, you'll be able to handle it because you're not just stuck playing the major scale you've always done. You can play the key signature starting in any place. Okay? So we just went up one each time till we got all the way to the top, and then we went down one each time as well. This is called Modal workout because each one of these measures is technically a mode of the major scale. So like if I play this one, that was the Lydian, this is the Mixolydian. They have old Greek names that you probably don't need to know at the minute. When it's time to know those, we'll go over them and make sure we know the names of everything. But for right now, we just want to play it correctly. Now Now, it's important to do this in all 12 keys, but you shouldn't try to do it all at once at the first go because you will probably get confused. So many of these measures, like that Mixolydian I just played, is only one note different than a major scale. So it's one note different than a C major scale when we're in the key of F. So it's very easy to accidentally slip and play a major scale you weren't expecting, and then a few measures later you don't even remember what key you're in. So try to only do a couple a day or something. If you're feeling adventurous and it's working, keep going, but usually most people get tripped up every couple until you've gotten the hang of it and done them all a few times. So you go all the way around the circle with that. Okay? So between making sure our scales are good, making sure our modal workout is good, and sight reading, that's actually a lot of things to practice when you take into consideration the 12 keys that we're supposed to go through for each one, right? It ends up a lot more to practice than you would expect, and it takes a while. There's nothing wrong with something taking time, right? Some music practice is time consuming. Doesn't mean it's hard or difficult for us, just means it takes more time to get it as solid as possible. We want these scale pictures and these key signature pictures so good that we can use them as our rule number 2, right? Our key signature rule. And so to review our rules really quickly, we'll say it one more time before we're done. Rule number 1 is rhythm. Rule number 2 is key signature. And rule number 3 is direction. Follow those rules, know your modal workout, and all of your reading is immediately going to be better.